When I saw my daughter's shoe floating on that dark, still water, something inside me died before I even heard her name called. The lake had always been peaceful to me, a place I went to breathe when life got too heavy. But that morning, it wasn't peaceful. The air was thick with shouting, the police radios crackled, and I remember the way the wind carried the smell of wet soil and fear. They said it was an accident, that she slipped. But I know when someone lies to me, and that family, her husband's people, they weren't just lying, they were acting. I remember the way her mother-in-law stood at the edge of the dock, clutching her scarf like she was starring in a play, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "We tried to save her," she said, looking at the officer, not at me. I didn't believe a word. "My name is Elaine Harper. I'm 58 years old, a retired school secretary, and a mother of two, my son Daniel and my daughter Lily. And this is the story of how I lost Lily, and how my brother made sure her truth didn't stay buried beneath that lake. Before all this happened, life was quiet, or at least it looked that way from the outside. I lived in a small town in Minnesota where the biggest excitement was when the grocery store got new management. My days had rhythm, coffee at 6:30, tending to my roses, church on Sundays, and dinner with Lily every Thursday evening. Lily had always been my sunshine. She had that laugh that made people turn and smile, even if they didn't know why. She worked as a nurse at the local clinic, the kind of woman who would skip lunch to sit with a lonely patient. But she also had a stubborn streak, just like her father used to. When she met Mark, her future husband, I wasn't sure. He was polite, yes, but there was a coldness about him. Like every word he spoke had been measured, polished, and practiced. His family owned a construction company a few towns over, the type of people who liked to be seen at church, always first to donate when there was a fundraiser. They wore goodness like jewelry, something to flash when needed. Still, Lily loved him, and I wanted her to be happy. Their wedding was small, elegant. I remember standing beside her in that tiny church dressing room, fastening the buttons on her lace gown. She caught my eyes in the mirror and said softly, "Mom, I think I finally found my forever." I smiled, even though my chest felt tight. After the wedding, she moved into his family's lake house, a sprawling property his parents boasted about endlessly. They lived in one wing, Lily and Mark in another. I thought it was strange, newlyweds sharing space with in-laws, but Lily brushed it off. "They're family," she said. "They've been so kind." At first, I tried to believe that. She'd call, send pictures of the lake at sunset, her morning coffee on the porch. She said she was happy. But then something changed. It started with small things, missed calls, shorter visits. Her laughter when she came by seemed thinner, like she was forcing it. One afternoon, I asked her directly, "Lily, are you all right?" She smiled, but her eyes darted away. "Just tired, Mom. You know how work gets." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that night, when I went to wash her coffee cup, I noticed her hand had been shaking. I called my brother that night, James. James isn't like me. Where I am careful, he is sharp. He was a detective for 20 years before retiring early, after what he called too much filth and not enough justice. But to me, he's still the man who used to walk me home from school when we were kids, daring anyone to look at me wrong. When I told him about Lily, he didn't say much. Just, "Keep an eye on her, Elaine, and don't ignore your gut." That was James, always reading between lines no one else saw. A few weeks later, Lily came by for dinner. It was meatloaf, her favorite. But she barely ate. She sat there stirring mashed potatoes on her plate, eyes distant. Finally, I asked, "Did you and Mark have an argument?" She froze, just for a moment. Then she said, "No, everything's fine. His mother's just difficult sometimes. She thinks I should stay home more, help around the house." Her voice cracked a little. I said, "You work full-time, Lily. You don't owe her that." She sighed and smiled like a child trying to calm her mother. "It's just how they are. I can handle it." But I saw the faint bruise near her wrist when she reached for her glass, a thumb-shaped mark. And that was the moment, the first real clue, when I felt the quiet fear take root inside me. Because I'd seen that same mark before, years ago, on my own skin. That night, after she left, I sat by the window for hours. The crickets outside were loud, and the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and dish soap, things that used to make me feel safe, but not that night. That night, everything felt wrong. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I picked up my phone and called her again. No answer. The next morning, she texted, "Sorry, Mom, fell asleep early. Love you." But I noticed the timestamp 3:12 a.m., and I knew Lily didn't fall asleep early. The days after that were heavy. I tried not to hover, but every mother knows when something's wrong with your child, your heart doesn't rest. Lily's calls became rarer. Her voice sounded smaller, distant. I could hear something in the background, sometimes muffled voices, a door shutting, the faint echo of tension. When I asked her what that was, she'd say, "Oh, just Mark's parents watching TV." I wanted to believe her, but it didn't sound like TV. It sounded like arguments. James came over one evening, unannounced, carrying a six-pack and that old, quiet look he wore when he was piecing something together. "You've been pacing," he said, setting the bottles down. "Tell me what's going on." So I told him everything. The missed calls, the bruise, the way her texts felt like someone else was writing them. He listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair and said, "You think she's in danger." "I think she's not safe," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Then we don't wait for proof, we find it." That's how James was: practical, patient, but when he decided to act, he did it quietly, efficiently. He said he'd make a few calls, look into the husband's family. "Construction," he muttered. "That's where half the dirty money in this county flows." I didn't want to believe that about them, but I also didn't want to find out too late that I should have. 2 weeks later, Lily came to visit again. I noticed she'd lost weight. Her cheeks looked hollow, her eyes tired. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. I tried to make things feel normal. I made her favorite apple pie. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen, and for a brief moment she laughed like she used to, telling me about a silly patient at the clinic who insisted he'd broken his leg because his cat looked angry. We laughed, but then her phone buzzed. She looked at it, and all that light drained from her face. "Is that Mark?" I asked. She nodded, setting the phone face down on the table. Her hand trembled slightly. "Lily," I said softly, "does he hurt you?" Her eyes flicked up at me, wide, scared. Then she shook her head. "No, he just gets angry sometimes. His family puts pressure on him, and I try to keep the peace." "The peace," I repeated. "At what cost?" She didn't answer, just reached for my hand. "Mom, I'm fine, really, don't worry." But her hand was cold, and I could see a small red mark under her sleeve, shaped like a ring. When she left that evening, I stood at the window and watched her car drive away. James was sitting on my porch steps, watching too. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. I nodded. "She's being controlled," he said. "That family's got something on her, fear, guilt, something. I can see it in her body language." I turned to him. "What can we do?" He stared out into the dusk. "We wait. And we listen. People like that, they slip up eventually." The call came 3 days later. It was late round 11 p.m. My phone buzzed, and when I saw the number, I felt ice in my veins. It was the sheriff's office. "Mrs. Harper," the voice said, "there's been an accident. Your daughter, she fell into the lake." I remember my knees giving out, the phone clattering onto the kitchen floor. I could barely hear anything after that, just the sound of my own heartbeat and the echo of that word, fell. When I reached the lake house, the place was swarming with flashing lights. Police, paramedics, people whispering. I ran. I don't even remember my feet touching the ground until I saw the stretcher. They were pulling her from the water. Her hair clung to her face. Her skin looked gray. I screamed her name, but it was like the night swallowed my voice. Mark stood near the dock, soaked to the knees, his face blank. His parents were beside him, crying loudly, too loudly. I remember the mother's voice, high, trembling. "She slipped, Elaine! She slipped right off the dock! We tried to save her, but it was too late!" The father nodded, eyes darting everywhere except mine. "The boards are old. We told Mark to fix them." But something about the way they stood, not touching each other, not looking at the water, it didn't fit. It looked rehearsed. James arrived minutes later. He didn't speak. Just walked straight to me, took one look at the scene, and whispered, "Don't cry in front of them." "Not yet." I didn't understand what he meant, but I listened. Because James's face, I hadn't seen that look since his police days. The look that said he smelled a lie before anyone else could. The investigation was quick. Too quick. The report said accidental drowning. The lake was deep, the dock slippery. They said maybe she'd gone out for air or to feed the ducks and lost her footing. They closed the case in 3 days. But my brother, he didn't. He came to me one night with a folder in his hand, eyes dark and tired. I pulled the autopsy report, he said quietly, and the timeline doesn't add up. What do you mean? I whispered. She didn't drown right away, he said. There's bruising defensive marks. She fought someone before she went under. I covered my mouth. My body went cold. James looked at me, his voice steady but full of fire. Elaine. She didn't fall. Someone pushed her. I remember sitting there, my fingers trembling around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The rain tapped softly against the kitchen window, but I couldn't hear anything over the pounding in my chest. She fought back? I finally whispered. James nodded. There were bruises on her arms, around her wrists. She had water in her lungs, but she was alive when she went under. My heart clenched so hard I thought it might stop. Why would they? I couldn't even finish. He looked at me, his voice low. That's what I'm going to find out. There was a silence between us, heavy and endless, the kind that fills the air when the truth finally claws its way out. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photo, one he must have taken from the police report. It showed the edge of the dock, the wooden planks slick and cracked. But there, faintly visible near the railing, was a set of footprints. 2 pairs. One small Lily's and one larger closer to the edge. Those prints, he said, they match a man's shoe, size 11. Mark wears that size. I stared at the photo, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. But they said it was an accident. He interrupted softly. People like them don't let accidents happen. They create them. The days that followed blurred together. The town whispered, as small towns always do. Such a tragedy, they said. She was so young. At least she had a good husband. I wanted to scream every time I heard it, but I kept quiet like James told me. Don't show your hand, he'd said. Not yet. He started spending long nights away, driving out near the lake, talking to people I didn't know. Former employees of Mark's family business, the men who handled the construction contracts, even a waitress at the diner near their company office. Each night, he'd come home with that same haunted look, piecing the puzzle together. One evening, he sat down at my kitchen table and opened a notebook. His handwriting was small, precise, years of police work in every line. Elaine, he said quietly, did Lily ever mention their family finances? I frowned. No, not really. Why? He tapped the page. Because this family's drowning in debt. Their company's under investigation for fraud. Millions missing. If that gets out, they lose everything, the business, the house, their reputation. I blinked. But what does that have to do with Lily? He met my eyes. Her name's on some of their documents. I stared at him, confused. How? She's a nurse, not a business partner. They probably used her as a front, he said grimly. New family member, clean record, easy to forge a few signatures and make her look involved. If the feds ever came knocking, she'd take the fall while they walked away clean. I felt sick. You think she found out? He nodded slowly. And when she did, they silenced her. It's strange the way grief turns into something else when truth begins to surface. At first I was just broken, but now I was angry. Cold, quiet angry, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that plans. I went to the lake one morning, the first time since that night. The sun was barely up and the water shimmered like glass. I stood on that dock, staring at the place where they said she slipped. The boards creaked under my shoes, and I thought about her, her laugh, her hands, the way she always tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. James was right. This wasn't where her story ended. When I came home, I found a small envelope on my porch, no return address, just my name. Inside was a flash drive. I plugged it into my computer, my heart racing. There were 3 video files. The first showed Lily sitting at a table, her hands folded. She looked scared. Her voice was shaky. If you're watching this, Mom, it means something's happened to me. My breath caught. She glanced over her shoulder like someone was in the next room. They've been using my name for their accounts. I found papers in Mark's study, fake invoices, fake signatures. I tried to tell him I wouldn't be part of it, but he said it would ruin everything." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." The video cut out abruptly. The second video was from a hidden camera, maybe her phone. It showed the living room of the lake house. You could see Mark pacing, his father shouting. "She's not keeping her mouth shut," the older man said. "You better handle this before she drags us all down." Mark's voice was cold. "I'll take her to the lake tomorrow. We'll talk." The last video was grainy, recorded from a distance, maybe through a window. It showed them arguing near the dock. Lily's voice, faint but desperate. "I can't lie anymore, Mark!" Then a shove, a splash. I dropped the mouse. My whole body shook. For a long time, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could think about was her voice, that last plea, and the way the water had swallowed her. When I looked up, James was standing in the doorway. I hadn't even heard him come in. He saw the screen, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. "It was on the porch," I whispered. He took the flash drive, pocketed it. "We'll make sure they never touch another person again." That night, for the first time since she died, I slept without crying, because now I had purpose. Lily's truth wasn't gone. It was in my hands and in my brother's, and we were going to make them face it. James moved fast once he had that flash drive. Years of experience had taught him who to trust, and more importantly, who not to. He didn't take it to the local police. They'd already proven themselves too quick to close the case. Instead, he made a call to an old friend in Minneapolis, a federal investigator who owed him a favor. Within a week, quiet things started to happen. No sirens, no headlines, just whispers. Someone at the state attorney's office reopened Lily's file under new evidence. Subpoenas were sent out quietly. The Harpers' Mark's family didn't even know the storm was coming. Meanwhile, I tried to live as though life were normal. I kept my garden watered, attended Sunday service, smiled politely when neighbors gave me that pitying look. Inside, though, I was coiled tight, part grief, part fury. I'd go to the lake every few days, bringing flowers to the spot near the dock. The first time I did it, I saw Mark's mother there too. She was wearing her pearls, her hair neat as always, standing like a statue. When she noticed me, her face softened into that fake sympathy I'd seen 100 times before. "Elaine," she said, her voice honeyed. "It's so hard for all of us." She was like a daughter to me. I stared at her, holding my bouquet tighter. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, then she smiled again. "Grief makes us say cruel things." "No," I said quietly, "guilt does." She turned and walked away. Her perfume lingered, expensive, floral, and it made me sick. And it me sick. A few days later, James called me to meet him at a small diner outside town. It was late evening. The neon open sign flickered against the window as I slid into the booth across from him. He looked tired but alert, like he was balancing 10 thoughts at once. "They're cracking," he said without preamble. "The company's accounts are being audited. Fraud, tax evasion, the whole lot. And get this, they're trying to move money out of the country." I swallowed hard. "What about Lily?" He leaned closer. "The investigators building the case around her video. It's enough to reopen the cause of death as a homicide." My breath caught. "So they'll finally?" He nodded. "We'll get justice, but you have to stay quiet. No one can know we have that video yet," I agreed. But inside, I wanted to scream it from the rooftops. Still, James was right. Truth has to be timed just right too soon, and it gets buried again. It wasn't long before Mark reached out. He called me one evening, his voice low, hesitant. "Mrs. Harper, can we talk?" The sound of him made my skin crawl, but I said yes. I needed to see him, to look into the eyes of the man who had taken my daughter. We met at a small park by the water. It was early autumn, the trees burning gold and red, leaves scattering across the benches. He looked thinner, paler. There were dark circles under his eyes. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am," he said, staring down at his shoes. "For killing her?" I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. He flinched. "It was an accident." I stepped closer. I saw the video. His head snapped up, eyes wide. "What video?" "You know which one," I said. "The one where your father tells you to handle her. The one where she says she can't lie anymore." For a moment, I saw something break in him, not remorse, fear. He looked around, lowering his voice. "Where did you get that?" "Doesn't matter," I said softly. "You pushed her, Mark. You watched her go under. And then you went home and pretended to grieve." His jaw tightened, his hands trembling. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said. "And soon everyone else will too." He took a step closer, his voice turning sharp. "You think anyone will believe you? That family's name means something in this town." I met his eyes. Not for long. He stared at me for a moment longer, breathing hard, then turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw him free. The next week, it all came crashing down. The news broke early in the morning. Local business family under federal investigation, possible homicide linked to financial crimes. The article spread fast. Their smiling faces, the same ones that used to grace charity flyers and town parades, were now plastered across every TV screen and website, with words like fraud, cover-up, and manslaughter beneath them. Mark was arrested first, then his father, his M.O. There was brought in for questioning the next day. I sat in my living room, the TV flickering blue light across the walls, feeling nothing, just quiet. James walked in later, a small smile tugging at his face. "It's done," he said. "They've confessed." Mark broke first, said it was a struggle, that he panicked. Claimed he didn't mean to push her. I closed my eyes. But he did. "Yes," James said softly. "And now he'll pay for it." That night, I went to the lake again. It was cold, the air still. I stood there with a single lily in my hand, her flower, and watched the water ripple. I thought about everything she must have felt in those final moments: fear, betrayal, disbelief. And then I thought about her courage, how she'd recorded those videos, tried to do the right thing, even knowing the danger. I whispered, "You were braver than all of them combined." The wind carried the words away, but I liked to think she heard them. A few weeks later, I got a letter. From Mark. It came from the county jail. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. "Elaine, I don't expect forgiveness. What happened that night, it haunts me. I never meant to hurt her. My father told me if she talked, we'd all go down. I thought I could scare her into staying quiet. But she slipped. I tried to pull her up. I swear I did. I see her face every night. Please take care of her memory." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Not because I believed him, but because it was proof that guilt can rot even the proudest heart. James came by that weekend, carrying a box. Inside were Lily's things, the ones the police had kept for evidence: her phone, her necklace, her watch. He placed the box on the table, then looked at me. "It's over, Elaine." I smiled faintly. "No, James, it's just beginning." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to tell her story," I said quietly. "The truth, every detail, not for revenge, but so no other woman ever ends up like her." He nodded, his eyes softening. "Then she'll live on through your words." The trial was the hardest thing I've ever endured. Every morning I'd sit on that hard wooden bench in the courtroom, clutching a small photo of Lily in my hands, the one where she was laughing on her graduation day, sunlight tangled in her hair. Mark sat just a few feet away. His head was bowed most of the time. His parents sat behind the defense table, their expensive lawyers whispering strategy in their ears. They look smaller now, stripped of the power they once carried so proudly. The prosecution played Lily's videos for the jury. I couldn't breathe while they played. Hearing her voice fill that courtroom, shaky but strong, it felt like she was still fighting, still demanding to be heard. When the clip of the doc played, the room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Then the gasps. A woman in the gallery began to cry. Mark couldn't even look at the screen. He covered his face with his hands as the jury stared at him, not as a grieving husband, but as a man who had taken something precious and irreversible. When the verdict came guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy to commit fraud, I didn't cheer. I didn't even cry. I just closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lily." Because justice isn't joy. It's quiet. It's heavy. It's relief, laced with sadness. In the weeks that followed, the town changed its tune. People who once praised that family now avoided even saying their name. Their company folded within months, their home sold to pay off debts. But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt empty. Because justice doesn't bring back laughter in the kitchen, or morning phone calls, or the way Lily used to hum when she cooked. James kept visiting, making sure I wasn't alone. He'd bring me groceries, sometimes sit in the garden while I tended my roses. One afternoon he said, "You know, she'd be proud of you. You stood taller than any of them." I smiled faintly. She was always the brave one, James. I just followed her lead. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "You know." "To tell you what I think?" She didn't just leave us a story, she left us a warning. People hide monsters behind perfect smiles, but she showed them for what they are. He was right. That's why, a few months later, I started speaking at local women's groups, shelters, and community centers. I told them Lily's story not with bitterness, but with truth. I'd tell them, if you feel afraid in your own home, trust that fear. If someone makes you smaller, quieter, less yourself, that's not love. Each time, I saw someone in the audience lower their eyes, the way Lily used to when she tried to hide pain. And I knew then that her story was saving lives, even now. One evening, after a talk at the community center, a young woman came up to me. She looked barely 20. Her voice trembled when she said, "Mrs. Harper, my boyfriend gets angry. Sometimes She hesitated. He grabs my arm when we argue. I thought it wasn't serious until I heard about your daughter." I took her hands gently and said, "You don't owe anyone your silence. Get help before silence becomes your prison." She nodded, tears in her eyes. That moment, that one girl made every sleepless night worth it. Because maybe Lily's voice was still reaching through me, guiding someone else out of the dark. As winter settled in, I went to the lake one last time before it froze over. The trees were bare, their reflections shivering on the water's surface. I stood there with my brother beside me, the cold biting at our cheeks. "I keep thinking about what you said," I told him. "That she didn't fall, she was pushed." He nodded slowly. And because she was brave enough to tell the truth, they fell instead. We stood in silence for a while. Then I took out the small silver locket she used to wear, the one the police had returned to me after the trial. Inside was a photo of her as a child, covered in freckles, grinning from ear to ear. I opened the clasp, kissed it softly, and dropped it into the lake. It disappeared beneath the surface with a faint ripple. "She's free now," I whispered. James put his arm around me. "So are you, Elaine." Months later, I moved to a smaller house closer to town. I didn't want the big, quiet place anymore. I filled my new home with plants, framed photos, and small bits of light. On the mantel sat a candle that I lit every night for Lily, and for all the women who never got the chance to speak their truth. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear her laughter in the kitchen, soft, fleeting, like a memory that refuses to fade. And I smile, because I know she's still here in her own way. In every woman who finds courage, in every mother who listens to her gut, in every truth that refuses to stay buried. You know, when I sit here telling you this story, I still feel that lake wind sometimes, cold and sharp, the kind that stings your skin but wakes you up. That's what grief does, it wakes you up. It makes you see the world for what it really is, not a fair place, not always kind, but still worth standing in, still worth fighting for. I used to think Lily's story ended at that lake, but it didn't. It lives on every time someone finds the courage to walk away from a bad love. Every time a mother listens when her daughter says, "Something's wrong." See, sometimes evil doesn't look like evil. It looks like charm. It looks like a smile. It looks like someone who says, "I love you," and then takes a little piece of your freedom with every word. That's what Lily taught me. That love without respect isn't love, it's control. And silence isn't peace, it's a slow death. So if you're listening right now and you feel that tightness in your chest when someone raises their voice, or you keep making excuses for someone who keeps hurting you, listen to me, baby. That's not your fault. And it's not love. Leave before you become a story someone else has to tell, because you deserve to live, to really live, to laugh again. to breathe without fear, to walk by your own lake someday and feel peace instead of pain. And if you've already lost someone, know this, they're not gone. Not really. People like Lily don't just vanish. They become the voice in our hearts that says, you can do better. You can survive this. That's what I carry with me now. When I light that candle each night, I don't do it out of sorrow anymore. I do it out of a promise to keep telling the truth, to keep warning others, to keep love honest and strong and kind. Because the truth, love should never drown you. It should teach you how to swim. And that's the story of the lake. And my brother, and my daughter,